Well, welcome to Dunn County's Criminal Justice Collaboration Council's Making the Safe Choice OWI Virtual Community Forum. Thank you for joining us in this discussion today. My name is Sarah Benedict, and I'm the Criminal Justice Coordinator in Dunn County. And I am joined by a number of panelists who I'll introduce here shortly. The purpose of our forum tonight is to discuss the impacts and implications of OWIs operating while intoxicated on our community. We have a goal to raise public awareness, to educate and inform folks with the idea to prevent and reduce the number of OWI operating while intoxicated charges that we see here in Dunn County. Through the next hour, we will share some local information, data on OWIs and trends. We'll shed light on what happens when an individual gets stopped for an OWI and some of those long-term implications. We'll discuss how the community is impacted by OWIs and community safety. And we'll provide resources and information and options to make the safe choice. This forum is being live streamed on Facebook Live. It's also being recorded and will be put on Dunn County's YouTube channel for later viewing. We encourage viewer participation, and we will be fielding questions live. So we encourage people to send us questions through social media, through the Facebook Live chat, or to send to my email address, which will be provided at the end of this session. Any written questions that we get and we don't have a chance to address, we'll provide some information to be distributed later on. So at this time, I'd like to introduce our panelists. We're going to start with Menominee Police Chief Eric Atkinson. We have Dunn County Sheriff Kevin Bigt. We have Dunn County District Attorney Andrea Nodoff. We have Dunn County Judge Jim Peterson. And we have Dunn County Department of Human Services Director Chris Corpola. We also have our technical support team of Brenna Jasper with Menominee PD, and we have Luann Domes with Dunn County IT. So we appreciate their assistance tonight. Well, thank you, panelists, team, and viewers for joining us tonight in this important conversation. Let's begin by diving into some of the data. So I'm going to share my screen. And hopefully you're able to view the slides. All right, so can somebody tell me that they can see it for confirmation, please? That's not, can I get a thumbs up that you can see it?
You got it.
Thank you. All right. Okay, so I'm going to start with the good news. The good news is OWI trends are trending down in Dunn County. That is encouraging. We see a number of OWIs, but the trends are trending downwards in a general fashion. The bad news is we tend to see an overproportionate number of OWIs. Just looking at 2019 data, we had 316 offenses for operating while intoxicated. That ranged from an OWI first offense, a non-criminal offense, all the way to an OWI 10. When we look a little bit deeper at our data, we see that about 50% of the OWIs in 2019 were directly related to alcohol, 18% were directly related to drugs, and about 32% were unspecified. So that could be the combination of drugs and alcohol, or just alcohol and drugs. This information is based on our data that we received through our clerk of court's office, and it does cover all law enforcement jurisdictions in the county. So this would cover Menominee, Boyceville, Colfax, Elk Mound, UW Stout, our sheriff's department through the whole county, and then the state patrol. When we look at where folks are from that receive an OWI charge, 53% are county residents, but 47% are from out of county, and 15% of those are out of state individuals. So we do have the interstate that does cross through right in the middle of Dunn County, and we have a lot of travelers that pass through. We also have a university, and folks come and visit. So we have a mixture of where folks are from as far as who's receiving OWIs. When we look at the gender, we see about 70% are male, 30% are female. That's consistent with our crime trends in general that we see across the board. When we look at the age of OWI defendants, it ranges from 17 to 69 years old. And this is just 2019 data. The average age was 35, but the most common age for an offense was 23 years old. When we analyze the time of day, offenses are occurring all times of day, but the most frequent time, which makes sense, would be the late evening, and then the wee hours of the morning. But again, we are seeing OWI charges at all times of the day. When we dig a little bit deeper at the statistics, we see that the blood alcohol concentration levels really vary from the minimum was a 0.06 to the maximum of 0.342. The average blood alcohol concentration was 0.172. When we looked at the drug charges, we see that the most frequent was THC, possession of THC, or driving under the influence of THC, driving under the influence of methamphetamines or other narcotics. But the trend of drug driving is growing. And that's both illicit drugs, the illegal drugs, and prescription medications that are misused or abused. Digging a little bit deeper at the blood alcohol concentration, trying to put that in perspective, this chart here shows the OWI charge on the left, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 10, 10th offense. In the bottom is the blood alcohol concentration levels. So the yellow line, the gold line, really marks that legal limit of 0.08. The black line indicates what the National Transportation and Safety Board would define as high-risk drinking and driving. And that red line indicates what would be alcohol poisoning, loss of consciousness. And each dot here represents a driver that was picked up in 2019 in our community. As you can see, there weren't very many that occurred under that drinking or under that legal limit. So those are probably folks that shouldn't have had any alcohol in their system. Quite a few occur in that legal limit before we get to that high-risk drinking. But if you can see, the majority of our OWIs that we encounter in Dunn County are really indicating high levels of intoxication and high levels of risk to the public. When we get over here to the far side of this red line, these folks, most of us would be unconscious or risk of death, having that much alcohol concentration in our system. But these folks are out and driving. And again, it indicates the level of dependency that they have on alcohol and that risk to the public safety. So at this time, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we're going to bring in our panelists for some questions. So I want to start with Judge Peterson. Judge Peterson, you're the chair of our Criminal Justice Collaboration Council, and you have a unique position in our criminal justice system, being judged and really being able to see the full system. But from your perspective, why should the public care about drinking and driving in OWIs?
Well, you know, the law prohibition is driven by the fatalities and injuries, and the tragic effects that OWI-related crashes, drug driving-related crashes have on families and communities. And I think for anybody that's on the panel, I would think, especially law enforcement, the district attorney, have dealt with cases or dealt with victims, the families, members of those that have been killed or seriously injured by intoxicated or impaired drivers. And so, the law has progressively become, more harsh. And the whole idea is we don't want people driving on our roadways impaired. It's a public safety concern of the utmost importance because, it's something that we deal with. And it's also something that cuts across all walks of life, every socioeconomic group, every group you can imagine, may be out there driving under the influence at one time or another. It could happen to many, many people. So that is, and that's why we're here, right? And that because we want, there be no OWIs or no impaired driving in our community, and that that's the driver.
Thank you. Next question is for Chief Atkinson. What driving behaviors do you see with a probable OWI that is at risk for public safety, that really raises that risk?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that first part of that question?
What behaviors do you see with drivers of a probable OWI that would put the public at risk? What type of driving behaviors are you seeing?
Thank you. Well, you'll see a variety of them, but usually what catches our attention is people start weaving in and out of their lane of traffic. They'll cross the center line, they'll go off the roadway into the ditch or come back out. They will not have their lights on during hours of darkness. They will fail to obey traffic signals like stop signs, stoplights, failure to yield to other vehicles at four-way stops. It's a variety of things, but usually those are the first signs of impairment. And anytime you have people that are deviating from their lane of traffic or not obeying right-of-way laws, that puts the public at risk because the public is certainly anticipating that people are going to follow the laws. And then now they have another driver that could be oncoming or next to them or approaching them, and they just don't know what's going to happen or how to react. And it presents a variety of hazards and a variety of difficult situations for our drivers. So it is a very dangerous situation.
Thank you. Next question for Sheriff Bigt. Could you walk us through a probable OWI stop through law enforcement's perspective? Really, what happens and what typically do you see with a OWI stop?
Sure. And these stops can happen for several different reasons. We may get a 911 call, say there's a vehicle going down Highway 79 all over the road, or it may be observed traffic violations, as the chief described. So the officer initiates a traffic stop on a vehicle with reasonable suspicion, either for a traffic violation or a reasonable suspicion they may be driving impaired, and make contact with the driver. And speaking from experience, usually you can tell in about the first 5 seconds you're at the window of a vehicle if you have a severely impaired driver. And of course, a pretty impaired driver thinks they're doing very well and thinks they're walking and talking and handing you their driver's license when they're really handing you their credit card and things like that are some real telltale signs. So usually the officer will go back to his squad, let dispatch know that who he's out with, run a driver's license check on the person in the vehicle, and then go back up and initiate second contact and ask the driver to step out for field sobriety exercises. And once, there's certainly indications for an officer, some of which I just described, slurred speech, glossy eyes. They think they're doing quite well speaking to you, but obviously they have a different perception of how well they're speaking a lot of times than the officer that has contact with them. They maybe run through a variety of field sobriety exercises, horizontal gaze in nystagmus, one leg stand, heel to toe test, which are indicators, and the officer is trained to observe clues throughout those tests, and a certain number of clues kind of is an indicator for their level of impairment. So, once the officer makes a determination that the person is impaired and makes an arrest decision, then usually placed in handcuffs and transported to the hospital for a blood draw.
Thank you. Another question for Chief Atkinson. What vehicles do OWI laws apply to? Is it just cars and trucks, or are there more vehicles that are covered?
Any motor vehicle is covered under that. So it could be a commercial motor vehicle. It could be a regular automobile. It could be a pickup truck. It could be a dump truck. It could be a bus. It could be any number of vehicles where it's applied.
Does that
I'll throw in that includes a motorized bicycle. So if
that is correct.
A scooter, a motorized bicycle, anything that has a motor that's operated on a public roadway.
So that would include a snowmobile or ATV or other recreational vehicles?
Those are slightly different if it's a recreational vehicle for DNR type violations. But if you have a motorized vehicle on a roadway, then that's how those laws would apply to that for your MVWIs.
Thank you. Sheriff, can you talk to us about what is drug driving and how does that put our public at risk?
I'm sorry, Sarah, did you say drugged driving?
Yep, drugged driving.
Okay. Yeah, well, it's certainly as dangerous, if not more dangerous than driving while under the influence of alcohol. We're seeing impaired drivers under the influence of meth at 10 o'clock in the morning driving around the city of Menominee, throughout the county. And to the lay person, it's probably a little harder to detect. Pretty much anybody that's sober can usually smell alcohol on somebody who's been drinking, but and they might notice a few things with somebody who's impaired by THC, marijuana, or methamphetamines, but they're almost more dangerous that people don't think they can be detected while driving impaired by a restricted controlled substance. So they're going to the grocery store at noon. They're going to, wherever, and sometimes hauling their kids around while doing it. So I feel it's as dangerous, if not more dangerous than the alcohol. And a lot of times we're seeing a combination of both. A couple, drinks of alcohol on top of smoking marijuana or using methamphetamines, and then operating a vehicle, which just multiplies the problems it causes. And right now, as you've seen from the numbers, we're seeing about 1/3 of the arrests that we're making are RCS violations or restricted controlled substance operation violations compared to alcohol. So if you think about that, if the sheriff's office is making about 100 arrests a year in the county, about 33% of those are drugged driving.
Thank you. All right, moving on to District Attorney Nodoff. How is impaired driving defined in Wisconsin?
So if you have, as the sheriff was saying, a restricted controlled substance, it's any one of the substances that are restricted in Wisconsin. So THC, methamphetamine, prescription pills if they're not safe to be operating. And then impaired driving is above the legal limit. So anything above 0.08. If you have subsequent offenses, past OWI, I want to say fourth, it goes down to a lower, 0.02 limit for alcohol. So it sort of depends on each case, though.
Thank you. Could you tell us what an OWI prosecution looks like from your perspective, and give us a sense of really how long it takes for an OWI case to move through our court system?
Well, it's really case specific, but it depends if we have a blood draw or not. So all of our blood draws, when law enforcement makes a traffic stop, makes contact with someone, usually forms field sobriety, and then if they make a determination to believe that that driver is under the influence, then usually a blood draw is obtained, and then that gets sent to our Wisconsin State Crime Labs for testing. Alcohol goes to a little bit different testing than drugs. So our drug testing takes longer, and it sort of depends on the time. Right now it's taking much longer than I would have liked, but right now it's taking at least 6 to 9 months to get drug results. Alcohol results are much quicker. Sometimes we have individuals who, if we have enough to determine they were under the influence based on a PBT or based on the officer's observations, we'll file a complaint right away. And then once we get those blood results, then we'll amend our complaint to include the second charge of, so there's operating under the influence, and then there's the operated with a restricted controlled substance or a detectable amount of alcohol in someone's blood. But some individuals want to get the case resolved right away, take responsibility, get treatment, stop, drinking or consuming drugs, and we can get that wrapped up in a couple of months. Other individuals, they can take a year or sometimes longer. So, but we see a lot of these in our system. So, to be honest, they're a little bit easier, in my opinion, to prosecute. We've got usually video, as the sheriff said. Some individuals are, we can tell by the way they're interacting with the officer that they are certainly not safe to be driving. And then we've got more of the science aspect of what's in their blood. So they tend to be resolved outside of a trial, but if there is a trial, then we're looking in the 1 to 2 years to resolve.
Thank you. Also, part of your office's role is victim rights. Could you speak to us a little bit about some of the victimization that you've seen with operating while intoxicated throughout your years that you've been here?
Yeah, those are some of those cases that I don't think I'll ever forget. Individuals who have been victimized walking around and doing, we had a student who was hit by a drugged driver, young student who had a very promising life ahead of her, who, was basically put in a wheelchair and crippled for quite some time. And her world was thrown into chaos, and she had a huge amount of medical bills, and her life was never the same. And she was following the rules, walking to school. I've had individuals who have lost loved ones out of the blue, who are obeying the laws, not doing anything wrong. And so, as Judge Peterson said, I believe that the penalties are so strict because of the very tragic consequences that can result. People's lives are changed, and they lost a brother, a sister, a son, a daughter, a close family friend, and out of nowhere. So those are very difficult cases, and they take time, and once they do get resolved, I don't know if anyone wins. I mean, if a person goes to prison and is found guilty, it's just sad all around.
Shifting to the penalty side, Judge Peterson, could you kind of tell us generally what are some of the consequences that people can face if they are convicted of an OWI?
Well, let me give you a little background first. I don't go back to the beginning of the OWI law. I'm not that old, but I've been practicing law for 35 years now. And I started as a defense attorney. I did some defense of OWI cases, and that was back when it was 0.10 was the prohibited alcohol concentration. There was no detectable amount, and they counted the total number in 5 years, and there were no 0.02, or there were no felonies. And then through my career as a prosecutor, which began in 1988, and I have to say I've tried, I couldn't tell you how many, but I have personally tried hundreds of OWI cases. We used to have a lot more trials. It's taken a very big concerted effort to win the public over. It used to be difficult. There used to be, frankly, I think, more impaired driving, and a lot has been done to reduce it. But as time has gone on, and I don't want to get into too much detail because it would take the rest of the time, but as things started to go up, first, I think it was somewhere in the early 1990s that you started counting the total. I can't even tell you now, I have it written down somewhere, but the total number in 10 years. Then it went to the total number in a lifetime since January 1st of 1989. So it was right around that time, 89, 90. And also then around 2003, you had the 0.02 after you've had 3 convictions for either OWI, prohibited alcohol concentration, or a related offense like a homicide or great bodily harm or bodily harm caused by. And then I think it was around 2003 that we had the detectable amount of RCS, and that was driven by the baby Luke law, it was called. Many of the changes in the OWI law were a result of a very tragic and highly publicized crash and fatality situation. But currently, if you have a first offense, and Wisconsin is the only state, I believe, left in the U.S. that it's not criminal. It's considered quasi-criminal because it actually can become criminal after you get the offense. If you get another intervening offense or a refusal in another case somewhere, then it can become a second or subsequent then criminal charge. And just to give people an idea, a criminal charge means that you can go to jail for it as one of the penalties. And the difference between a misdemeanor OWI, which would be your second and third offense, I think the second offense, the maximum is 6 months. I think no, second offense is it up to a year? Yeah, 6 months. And then third offense, I got my guidelines right here. Actually, I could tell you what the actual guidelines would be. If you had a first offense, looking at $811.50 plus a blood draw fee, and possibly the requirement of an ignition interlock device. On a second offense, you're looking at a range of penalties. We have guidelines in our district, but you're talking roughly $1,500, and you'll probably be looking at anywhere from 10 to 20, but you could go to jail for much longer if it's an aggravated offense. If you have, for example, a minor under age 16, that can increase the potential penalties. And if you have a third offense, you're looking at, you're probably going to be doing between 60 days and 120 days, roughly, depending on the circumstances. You could do less if you were on probation. You can place people on probation for a second and third offense. When you get to fourth offense, it's a felony, and now there is a lifetime revocation of operating privileges if you get a fourth offense in a lifetime. And folks, that could be 0.02, right? It could be a result of just having a contact, with law enforcement. Maybe you don't clear the snow, like tonight. If you don't clear the snow off the windows of your car, you might get stopped for that. And if you have 3 convictions and you smell of alcohol, that's probably going to be probable cause for arrest. So, but you could face up to, on the fourth offense, it could be, I believe, isn't it, Ms. Stonoff, like a 6-year felony? I think it is. You could go to jail, prison for up to 6 years, and again, a very large fine would go along with that. And there's a mandatory minimum, I should say, also with second, third, and fourth offense. Actually, right up the line. And so when you get to a fifth and sixth in a lifetime, it's just changed recently. I think it was last February, somewhere in that neighborhood, right about the time the legislature approved a third judge for Dunn County. So that's about the time frame. So with a fifth and sixth offense in a lifetime, you have a mandatory minimum prison sentence with a minimum of 18 months of initial confinement in a Wisconsin prison facility. So that means if you get a fifth or sixth now, you're going, if you're convicted, you're going to Dodge Correctional, you know, and the razor wire and the guard towers and the whole bit. So when you get to a seventh, eighth, or ninth offense in a lifetime, and trust me, you know, we see these, you're looking at a mandatory minimum 3 years in prison, in state prison, plus extended supervision beyond that. So the court has no discretion, frankly, on that. And except it could be more than the mandatory minimum. When you have a 10th or more, you're looking at a mandatory minimum of 4 years. But, you know, I don't have the maximums here in front of me, but I think the maximum is up to 10 years or more. Maybe that's a Class F felony. I forget the details, but, you know, we always have to look these things up. That's why they give us all these books. But the bottom line is there are very stiff consequences. And that's, I think, the reason we wanted to have this forum, so people know that. And I'll tell you that I've talked to legislators that were involved in some of these changes in the law. And the harshness or strict penalties are based in large part in the concept that we want to deter impaired driving. But the problem is, you know, maybe many of the people watching this forum probably aren't the people that are going to get, you know, an impaired driving citation. But maybe they can tell their friends and neighbors that they see driving impaired, that you could go away for a long time. And so the deterrent effect isn't going to happen unless people are aware of it. But the unfortunate thing is often when people are impaired, they're making that decision to get behind the wheel. And, you know, but, you know, we're seeing a lot of people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, you know, just watch the news sites, you know, the local TV news websites, and you will see every couple of days, you know, there's some older person who's looking at going away to prison for a long time because of a high level of offense. And they do happen, and we wish there were fewer. So any more specific questions on penalties? There's also revocation of operating privileges. If you're over 0.15 on a first, you're required to have an ignition interlock device for at least a year, and it could be longer. Second and subsequent offense, all of those are required ignition interlock device, even during revocation, plus a period after you're reinstated. And one other thing is that the revocation on fourth offense is revocation for life, fourth and subsequent. So think about that. If you don't want to be a pedestrian the rest of your life and you have some OWI convictions, you simply should not get behind the wheel at all because you face lifetime revocation of your operating privileges. Any other, and did I miss anything? There are a lot of details and penalties and potentials. And there are a lot of people in the Wisconsin prison system today because of an operating while impaired case. Not just killing somebody, but operating while impaired.
Thank you, Judge. Yeah, you spoke to fines and fees and suspension of driver's license and potential jail time, potential prison time. But now I'm going to turn it to Chris Corpola. Can you speak to us about some of those other implications? Other things happen that are outside of the courthouse that somebody with an OWI conviction has to kind of face. And some of these are longer term challenges. Chris, can you talk to us about that?
I can. So I'm going to speak to two things. One is the impact of an OWI on your insurance, and the other is the impact of the follow-up requirement through the Wisconsin Intoxicated Driver Program. So let me talk first to your insurance. Most people have insurance with a preferred insurance carrier, a standard carrier. And after an OWI conviction, you have to obtain what's called an SR-22. It's a certificate of insurance indicating that you've been provided with car and auto insurance. And an SR-22 is obtained through your insurance carrier. However, most standard insurance carriers won't issue one. They will require you to go to a non-standard carrier or a high-risk carrier for insurance. So you'll be informed by the court that you're going to need to carry this SR-22 for any place between roughly 6 months to, it could be much longer depending on your driving record and other risk factors. And then in addition, the non-standard and the high-risk insurance company is required to report if you don't keep that coverage. So if you receive it, you get your SR-22 from a non-standard company, and then you drop the coverage because you can't afford it, they need to report that. And even though Wisconsin is a required insurance state, as a general rule, your insurance company is not going to tell someone when you don't have coverage any longer, but in this particular case, they're going to. If you have more than one person on your insurance plan, then the non-standard plan is going to have to cover everybody on your insurance. So think about spouse and children. And the premiums would increase anywhere from a few $100s if you have a perfect driving record prior to your offense to well over $1,000. So there's a significant financial impact. When your requirement for the SR-22 expires, you can return to a standard carrier. However, many standard carriers now will never insure someone again if they've had more than 2 offenses, or one if they're on their second or greater offense. And then the other impact is that many insurance companies invest in some really very sophisticated data mining tools. And so if you live with someone, say, and you're not necessarily married, and you're not even on the same insurance plan, but you have a match up in the data background of your address, and one of you receives an OWI, your insurance carrier may reach out and cancel your plan based on someone who lives in your household under the idea that you are both potentially driving the same vehicles. So that's sort of that side of that. And then the other piece about it is Wisconsin also operates an intoxicated driver program. So it's designed to provide education and treatment to individuals who've been convicted of an OWI offense, trying to reduce their likelihood of reoffending. So upon conviction, a person is required to complete an OWI assessment. An assessment is different. An OWI assessment is different than a substance use or what would commonly be known as an AODA assessment, in that the State Department of Transportation provides the format for that assessment, and it results in a finding anywhere from along a continuum from irresponsible use to dependency. And dependency is an old and dated term, but it is the one that the DOT still uses. People are advised to schedule their assessment within 72 hours after their conviction. And each county designates one facility to do their assessments. In our particular case, it's Arbor Place here in Menominee. OWI assessments are paid at the time of scheduling, and they can be paid in cash, a debit card, a credit card, or money order. They are currently $285 for the assessment. Prior to meeting with the assessor, the person completes a questionnaire. They're asked to bring a copy of the arresting police report. And they meet with the assessor, engage in a conversation about their use, and then the assessor makes that finding that I referenced earlier. And they develop a driver's safety plan. It's designed to address services that the person might need to lessen their likelihood of reoffending, and they have a year to complete their assessment. On the least sort of side of it, least impactful side of it, a person could be required to attend education classes, commonly called group dynamics. In our community, they're offered by CBTC or an alternative at community counseling services in Chippewa Falls. The group dynamics class on an OWI first offense is 21 hours long. And for second and greater multiple offenses, it's 33 hours long. And the cost of the assessment, or I'm sorry, the cost of the class is from $265 on up to over $350, depending on which category you fall into. If a person has a driver's safety plan that they don't follow through with, they move into a status of non-compliance, and then there's a fee to be reinstated. So you might end up paying some more money. And people will frequently wait until the last minute. And if you wait until the last minute to complete your requirements or your driver's safety plan and the year expires, you have to start all over again. So you have to have another assessment, pay for another assessment, do another driver's safety plan, and complete it. When I was speaking with the OWI assessor, she said she's seen people pay up to 3 times for their assessment and their driver's safety plan requirements. And then once you have completed your driver's safety plan, you can move to have your license reinstated.
So those are definitely some longer term challenges that folks will have to figure out after that OWI conviction. So we've talked about the scope of the problem, and we've talked about what officers see and how the prosecution side occurs, and we've discussed some of those increasingly harsh penalties that the state's enacting for OWIs. But let's talk about resources and really what options are out there for people. I'd like to, at this time, share my screen and share our resource page that we have created off of the Dunn County website. This is called Make the Safe Choice. We have here information as far as local transportation companies that can be contacted. We do have Uber and Lyft in our community, so we really encourage people to, if you need a ride home, a safe ride home, call a friend or a relative, or don't be shy about calling a taxi or Uber or Lyft. Also on this website, we have more information about that cost of OWI. So kind of some of those fees and fines and loss of driver's license and that ignition interlock, that information's out there as well. And folks in the community will start to see these in various places. We have created a QR code on these posters that you'll start to see in our community, that if you link that, it links back to this website, and we are going to continue to add more safe ride home options to this website for the community. But we really wanted to be sure that we're highlighting this website overall. And again, this is just Make the Safe Choice, Dunn County, and it should get you to the website. At this time, Chris, can you tell us more about what resources are available for people that do have an issue with drugs or alcohol? What treatment resources might be available?
So in Dunn County, we are blessed to have a treatment resource in our backyard. Arbor Place Incorporated is here in Dunn County. They are across the U.S. Highway 29 from where I am, or State Highway 29 from where I'm sitting right now. And they have a very nice facility there. They offer everything from education through outpatient through residential treatment. There also is Farman Center in Eau Claire, which is a 43-bed facility, and then Ellie Phillips in Chippewa Falls, which also does the gamut of treatment resources. However, there are a plethora of other options available to people. We have an active recovery community here in Dunn County. So if you go out and you take a look at the Alano club here in Menominee that can get connected to resources and other people that are working through recovery. If you just do a Google search to recovery-based apps, recovery-based chat groups, recovery-based meetings, recovery-based forums. There are a plethora, and some of them are very custom designed. There's a Crystal Meth Anonymous group that you can do a virtual meeting with. There are Marijuana Anonymous groups that you can do virtual meetings with. Some of the meetings have some Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous groups have local kind of virtual groups that meet and do some meetings in person, but with COVID that's been impacted, so it's sort of always best to check. But you don't have to leave your living room in order to seek resources, education, and support if you want to look at not only maybe just total sobriety, but even just harm reduction, drinking less, having less positive or negative impacts in your life, and diminishing the likelihood that you'll be arrested for an OWI.
Thank you. And Judge, final question before we look at our submitted questions from our viewers. But can you talk to what our criminal justice system is doing here in Dunn County as far as connecting people with treatment and prioritizing programs related to drugs and alcohol?
Generally speaking, well, there are a whole, I guess I'll borrow Chris's term, a plethora of options, depending upon what your circumstances are. There may be, and the DA could probably speak to this, but anywhere from a pre-charge agreement that may require some drug education. And we have the TOP program, which involves, may or may not involve a deferred agreement, but would involve drug or alcohol testing. We have our treatment court, which we've had some impaired driving people in there, and I'm sure that many participants, even though that may not be the offense that brought them to treatment court, probably have a history of driving while under the influence, and that involves a great deal of monitoring and testing on a regular basis. Probation is another option that occurs. Unfortunately, there aren't as many resources with probation for testing as we have in our TOP program here in Dunn County, actually. And that accountability of the testing, again, this is for someone that's getting in trouble because they don't have a handle on their situation, and that accountability often is very helpful in well, either you're gonna abide by the law or you're gonna end up getting into deeper trouble. But we do offer a variety of incentives, carrots versus a stick, but the public frankly wants us to use that stick in serious cases. And what I didn't mention before, and I just think I want to circle back to this, but it could happen to anybody that's driving while impaired. You get unlucky and you kill somebody, then you're looking at up to 40 years in prison, and that's probably going to ruin your life in many ways. So, and not to mention the people that rely on you for support, in the community, your kids, and so on and so forth. And I haven't met a defendant yet that wanted or went out to kill somebody driving under the influence. At least I don't know that. And nor have I met anyone that wanted to get their second or third or fourth offense. But again, as I said, it happens, and you see the numbers, and it happens in our community, and it happens around the state. We've had some, again, a large number of cases on the interstate, where we end up prosecuting, or the state prosecutes, but we end up in our system handling some serious cases from people from far away. We have Chicago one direction, Minneapolis, St. Paul the other direction. They go right through here, and so we get a lot of cases off of the interstate, and we have to expend our resources, on those folks. But there's, we try. I think in the system there's a lot of and I want to be careful what I say here, because you remember old Sheriff Zebro, Sheriff Big, years ago when I was the DA one time, there was a situation where there was a front page story in the Dunn County News, and it was about the sheriff talking about the DA's office, and he says, in this big bold type, it says, "I think there's too much dealing going on up there." And but in many cases, and maybe there were, I mean, I think we really redoubled our effort, but just so people are aware, the prosecutor can't dismiss an OWI. They can't do a deferred prosecution on OWI. I mean, so there really isn't much dealing that goes on too much, and except related to some penalties or some, again, like the IDIP program, where you go through a program, it could reduce the amount of time that you get, or if you're on probation. But, some of these folks are doing hundreds of hours of community service in order to reduce the amount of jail they're doing. So, some dealing goes on, but it should, but often in other types of cases, behaviors that people are engaged in, they get in trouble for, and they're in the criminal justice system, are behaviors that will get them in trouble with impaired driving as well. Because if you're using drugs, you're risking, a drug driving case. So I don't want to go on any further. I hope that helped answer your question.
Yes, thank you. Brenna, do we have any questions coming across the chat?
Yes, we do. So we have one that came in, a couple of comments along the way too, just on the penalties, and then a nice thank you that was sent our way. But the question that came in, and I'm going to read it verbatim so I get it right. How is COVID affecting those who should be jailed but are not? Is this happening? And if so, how is this determined?
I can speak to that a little bit. Up until very recently, our jail was not affected by COVID. We were doing a fantastic job, I believe we still are, of keeping COVID out of our facility. But Huber inmates, which are work release inmates, were furloughed on their sentence. They were given the option to furlough when COVID really kind of struck towards the end of March. I allowed them to leave jail, go home, and continue with their job. Otherwise, they were going to run the risk of being locked up, having to stay in jail, and lose their job. My preference was for them to keep their job, work from home, come back, and finish out their sentence when later we thought COVID would slow down in a couple months, and it's done nothing but pick up here recently. So about June 15th, I had Huber inmates, work release inmates coming back to the jail to sit out the rest of their sentence. But they had to come back. Some may be granted Huber work privileges by the judge, but they don't come to jail with a job, so they're allowed to search for a job. Those inmates were not released to look for jobs. If you had a job, we didn't want you to lose your job, so you're allowed to come back, serve out your sentence, and then continue to go to your job. But we ran that at the risk of bringing COVID into our facility. So I'll touch on COVID numbers a little bit for OWIs 2020 compared to 2019, but we're already above the number of OWIs, my agency, I should say, already above the number of OWI arrests that we had in 2019 this year. So people haven't stopped drinking and driving, haven't stopped driving under the influence of illegal drugs. We're at higher numbers already than we were in 2019.
Thank you. Brenna, any other questions from our chat stream?
Can I chime in on that last one just briefly? And this is something that people should think about, is for a third or subsequent offense, upon conviction, the court doesn't have the discretion to allow someone out on bond. So if you have a conviction, you go to trial on one of those, it's mandatory. You got to report immediately or forthwith. And it's common now that we set that report, or that, if it's a plea and OWI, a lot of times on a Friday, because, people have to go in, they can finish their work week and thereafter. But that's something to keep in mind, that COVID or no COVID, and the same with the state prison system, The word is down at Dodge, a lot of people have been confined to their particular room and not being able to go out or have much recreation to control COVID. So, that's an added incentive to not put yourself out there exposed to the penalties of impaired driving. Thank you.
And that's it for our Facebook questions that we had received.
All right, thank you. Judge, I think you summed it up that these really are avoidable offenses, and people can really make a safe choice and choose not to drink and drive or use drugs and drive. So on behalf of our panelists, our support team, we want to thank our viewers for tuning in. I'm going to share my screen briefly with some contact information that I encourage people to, if you do have questions, to send me an email. We'll try to provide the answers at a later date, or to enhance our website with some more information. But again, we are very thankful that we live in such a safe community generally. And we are just really hoping that people can make that safe choice and just keep us all safe. So on behalf of us all, we wish you that you are healthy and remain safe and are making the safe choice. Thank you.